Hi, I'm Renee Williams,
And I'm Billy Thomas.
and welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. Today we have a very interesting topic. It's kind of like an agro term, I believe. It's silvopasture. And
Yeah.
Billy, just for our folks out there, they might not actually know what that is. So give us a little brief definition of what that is because, I don't want people going, well, I don't know what this is.
Yeah. No. Excited to be here with you as always, and really appreciate you all being with us today. Yeah. So we're talking about civil pasture today. So it may be a concept that some of you all are familiar with, but many may not be. So if you can imagine, we have pastures out there, right? And the cows are out there doing their thing. But they might need some other kind of resources, some structure, maybe shade or other things. So this is the ideal of integrating trees into a pasture system, right? With the hope that we can help the cows, we can help the trees, and we can help the pasture with all of this work. So we're really excited to have a brand new guest with us today, first timer, if you will. I'm Dr. John Fike from Virginia Tech is going to be talking to us about silvopasture. We really appreciate him sharing his expertise with us on that. And then we're going to have Mr. John Schultz, Kentucky State NRCS Forester. It's going to be talking about some of the cost share programs and how EQIP and some of these other programs can help support silvopasture opportunities. So this is a great opportunity for our audience out there to learn about this practice that can be implemented, in beef cattle and forestry type operations. So I'm really excited about this. If you'll have any questions for our presenters, you can use the chat function, or if you're on YouTube or you're a podcast listener, thank you. But you can also hit us up via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu, and we can respond that way to you. But Renee, delighted to be with you on this kind of rainy day in
Rainy
Lexington,
day.
Kentucky. Yeah.
Um, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So, Dr. Fike, if you'd like to turn your camera on. Yes.
So my screen is, oh, gee whiz.
Yeah.
My screen
We
is
can see
frozen.
you, but
We can
you
see you.
are
You're
But
just
frozen.
you see
like,
me moving.
No
no, we can't
movement.
see you moving, but
All
we can
right.
see you at least.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just gonna, all right, what happens if I hit share screen? Because
Let's
you don't
try
need
it.
to
Let's
see
see
Let's
me.
what we
try
get.
it.
Yep. Let's see what we get.
There we go.
There you
Perfect.
gotcha.
All right.
Perfect.
Excellent.
So when Chris and Renee approached me, and Chris really was the one who did this, Chris Deutsch, he said, well, let's just talk about kind of what this is and give some background or basis for it.
Mhm.
And so uh, my title, Silvopastures, and I'm going to try to think about this in the context both of putting trees back into a system as well as doing some thinning. And I'm going to, this term silvopasturing is a term that a forester friend, Brett Chedzoy, and I'll show some pictures from his place later today. He works out of Cornell, and he really talks about it in the context of, you're pasturing animals. It's kind of a challenging sometimes. Chris was talking to a farmer some years ago, and he said, "Well, we've been doing this stuff, but we didn't know you called it that." So, there's some terminological
Mhm.
issues or challenges sometimes. So, all right, what is silvopasture? And I want to focus on the fourth word here: a sustainable land management practice. And the idea that we've had from silvopasture really kind of comes out of an industrial kind of production model. Clausen was in Louisiana with lots of pine. Sharrow was in Oregon with lots of Doug fir that would be used for wood product systems. And the idea is what we could put animals in with these timber production systems to provide a long-term return from a tree and a short-term or moderate or medium-term uh, income with livestock production. So there's another way that people conceive of this and put it in what they call the 4I principle. We're intentionally integrating trees and livestock and forages. The management is intensive and it's interactive. So the 4I principle, you'll sometimes hear in that context. This isn't a new practice, and this is a picture that was taken here in Blacksburg, 15 years ago, probably, or more, when my kid was still playing t-ball or something. Yeah, more than 15 years ago. And you see the system. So this would have been, I think, fairly common in Appalachia. Um, there was no tractor supply back in the day. And if you wanted, you know, fence posts or poles or fuel wood, you had to go and extract that from the land base. And so what you see here largely are black locust trees. Um, and that black locust is a particularly beneficial tree, I think, in the context of silvopastures because it's not only rapidly growing, it is also a nitrogen fixer. So it's going to put some nitrogen back in to support these cool season species. Um, and it's browsable. You'll sometimes hear people talk about black locust or mimosa toxicity, and excuse me, robinia toxicity. I'll show you something that will counter that in a little bit. Um, anyway, these aren't new, but we changed our production systems. We had fertilizer plants that grew out of ammunition plants in the 40s, into the 50s. So suddenly we've got all these resources and people that'll sell you products. And so we're not trying to develop resources on farm to make the farms work. Um, so whether you want to make this work for you or not, I got no real worry about that. I thought I should have done a poll here, Renee. I don't know if I can do that. Maybe people just put it in the chat. Is the idea of integrating trees and forage systems, silvopasture, if you will, is that crazy, or are you a fence rider, or are you interested? You're at least curious enough to show up. I mean, I'm happy to address people who are across the spectrum relative to their thoughts on the subject. And I don't have any particular. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I'll say it that way. If you don't think this makes any sense, and I get that. When I first started with silvopastures, when the guy forester colleague came to me and said, "Hey, I've got this thing called silvopasture, and it's the integration of trees and livestock production for multiple benefits." And I thought, okay, that's crazy. And he said, "But would you be willing to work on this?" And my first reaction was sure. I mean, because I needed something to do. But in my head, it was, hey, that don't make any sense. So this picture, 2002, the kind of the striped bars, extremely dry. The state was under water restriction. 2003, it was quite wet, and it was like the good Lord never turned off the tap. And we had different tree densities, low, medium, or high. And you could call that a shade density, low shade, medium shade, high shade. And what we found was that over both of those years, we had 15% or better uh, forage or understory plant productivity uh, when we had this kind of moderated shade. And so, that's really what piqued my interest. You can see these trees, these are mostly honey locust in this picture. And you can see the different shade gradients that we got there. So if I have some level of shading for our cool season pastures, that's beneficial. Jump ahead 20 years, and Chris had a student, Kelly Mercer, who looked at shade gradients. And so, where should we try to be managing? And so this is cool season forage response to shade. And generally, what you're seeing is that if I'm in the 30 to 40% range of shade, I don't have any yield or any forage production drop. And so, that's often what we tell people. If you got cool season forages, 30 to 40% is a good target. Um, I think we could probably go higher depending on the plant species that we use. But for now, let's kind of keep that framing. 30, I'll even say 30 to 50. If you've got warm season grasses, maybe you go a little bit less. And so, well, okay, that's all well and good. But, you know, I don't know about the forage piece. Why, most people are interested in this sort of thing about integrating woody species back into the landscape because they're thinking about animal welfare. And so this is just a picture. I thought it was kind of a nice scene from New Zealand. They do a lot of work because they have fairly moderate environment, often get a lot of wind with moisture, and which can be pretty cold. And so, they strategically locate windbreaks across the farm to help protect their animals. Not really silvopasture, and again, I don't get too worked up about it. Trees or woody species have a place in the system. And for those of you who are producers, my guess is you take advantage of those. So what are the advantages? In a cold context, if we reduce wind speed, we reduce stress, we can improve feed efficiency. And so these are just a number of findings that show how those energy sparing practices, what their benefit are relative to animals. More commonly, probably people are thinking about the benefits in terms of livestock. If I can increase shade, I can reduce respiration rate and I can reduce agonistic behavior. And for those of you who are a certain age and of a certain musical persuasion, you may have heard Susie and the Banshees sing the 92 degrees, and they start the song by just saying, "Did you know more murders are committed at 92 degrees than at any other temperature?" So there are measures of animal behavior, and they beat each other up more when they're hot and stressed. So again, this is all kind of foreign to me when I got started, uh, and so I had to go back and look at some of the literature. And well, sure enough, in the 50s, they showed that animals, both cows and calves, if they had natural shade, gained more weight than if they didn't have any shade at all. And the calves seem to be a little more robust. They work well with artificial shade also. And I want you to look at this second table, and it gives you different animal behaviors, time spent grazing, time spent standing, time spent lying. And they do this for cows and calves across the different shade types. What's intriguing to me is, if you ask the average farmer, so, well, I got these cattle with shade. What do you think they're going to, how's that going to change their behavior? So, well, most people think they're going to graze more. And interestingly enough, these data say, no, that's not it. They spend more time standing if they don't have shade. So you see like four hours or so roughly for animals standing with shade versus 5 or 6 hours if they don't have shade. And so, kind of the opposite of standing is they lie down. So they spend more time in resting behaviors when they have shade. So, okay, that's nice. That was from the 50s. What about from the modern era? So these are some pictures of our trees. They're probably not quite to the same scale. Honey locust on your left, and black walnut on your right. We do prune these trees a bit to just to keep the tractors off of them. And we have to work with shade because these are kind of small plots, 2/3 of an acre, uh, experimental units at our site here in Blacksburg. And, people say, well, what about the forage response? Well, honey locust is in the yellow and green is the open system. And, over the 3 years of this study, we had similar or greater productivity with the honey locust system. You'll notice that the black walnut is about 30% less. So I started this conversation talking about management. And, it's critical to think about the dynamic nature of these systems. And, we had similar responses under honey locust and black walnut 20 years ago. But, fast forward 20 years and we're looking at larger trees. There's more shade. There are changes in composition underneath the tree, and it's less productive there. And, one way to manage that might be to, cut a couple of trees out and get a little more light into the environment. I will also say, too, that these systems are a little bit artificial because we're just testing how animals do, how plants do in an open system compared against systems that have trees. And I think if I'm a farmer, I'm not going to keep animals under trees all the time. I'm going to give them access to both. And we can think about that a little bit later. So, average daily gain, 2014, 2015, not a lot of difference among the systems. What was interesting in 2016, um, those animals that were in the black walnut system had higher or greater gains. Um, and so we have to reduce the stocking rate because we had less forage. So when you multiply the number of animals times their weight gain over the period, we weren't seeing much in the way of difference in animal gain across the systems. And you say, well, okay, that's great. So I fool with that. There may be some reasons to do that. There's opportunity for carbon benefit if you're planting trees and want to get into the carbon market. I can talk more about that later. There's also evidence that we're improving animal welfare from a stress standpoint. So these are a follow-up study, and you can see this top graph on your right. You can see those animals that are out in open pasture, they're hotter. These are vaginal temperatures. We put a sensor in the vagina that stays with them for 3 days or so, and we just measure their temperature over time. And you can see those animals in the black walnut silvopasture and the honey locust silvopasture, they're cooler through the day, and their temperatures don't start to pick up until the evening when they start grazing more again. The other thing that happens there with this being cooler is that these animals have lower cortisol. They are less stressed. And interestingly enough, just like those data from Arkansas in the 50s, those animals that have access to shade spend less time standing and more time lying down. These are images of the animals in the silvopasture and the open pasture. It's a little bit deceiving because you'll notice the open pasture scale, the bottom temperature starts at 25 degrees centigrade. So what's that, 70 something? It's a little bit cooler, degree and a half centigrade. So call it about 3 degrees cooler in the open system at the lowest temperatures. And the highest temperatures in the open pasture are in the 40s centigrade. Pretty uncomfortable. This is the average temperature for the picture, and versus say 34 centigrade. So yeah, 41 versus 34. And these are the averages, 31 versus 26. So 5 degrees centigrade, about 10 degrees difference there. Now, if we look at the average on the sheep, they're about 2 degrees hotter on the hide temperature than these animals over here. So they've got greater heat load they got to deal with. They say, well, let's go back and look at this image again. So, it's about at its peak, 38.5 versus 39.5, a degree centigrade, almost 2 degrees difference in body temperature. And, on the hide, almost 4 degrees difference. That animal's got to spend energy to get rid of that added heat. Not saying that they can't stay the same, but there's an energetic cost. Now, somebody said, well, that's great. You got these planted systems, but I'm more interested in what's going on. If I have the opportunity to do this in a thinned stand. And Chris was instrumental in getting this study set up. This is at the Southern Piedmont, hotter environment than what we have in Blacksburg. You'll notice, so we had 4 treatments. We had open pasture, and then we had a pine area that was thinned, and we had a hardwood area that was thinned, and then we had new silvopasture. So these are planted pines. You can kind of see some of the strips in there. And these are images from a study that was done after Chris left. Heifers in an open area crowding under the shade of a utility pole. They want shade. And let's back up a second. This is novel endophyte tall fescue. The heifers that are standing among young trees of the silvopasture, there's some weeds and some trees here, and you say, well, they're not a lot, but that's where they were. They weren't out in the open. And if they were in the hardwood silvopasture or the pine, they were taking advantage of the shade. And when the shade moves, what we've observed is the cattle or the sheep tend to move with it. And so here's a couple of things that are interesting. Oh, shoot, this is maybe not the. Yeah, I apologize. I was trying to pull all of this off a poster, and I don't think I did a great job of getting some of the forage data. Let's just look over here at hide temperatures. Those animals that had no shade in the morning, they're about 38, so 2 degrees hotter than those animals that are in the pine silvopasture, 36, and the hardwood silvopasture, 33. I'm not sure if I completely comfortable with those data, but they're definitely cooler than those animals that are out in the no shade site. And in the afternoon, again, these are black-hided animals, huge difference in temperature. Internally, the differences are not as great. You can see from about noon till 6 in the evening or so, those animals that are in the open systems are hotter with vaginal temperatures. That's heat they've got to get rid of. And so let's see here. This is uh, these are gains by season. Actually, I think I've got this better on another slide, right? Yeah, I'll come back to that. Um, so I guess I didn't realize that I had this in two different slide sets. I was trying to pull something that was more colorful. You can see the thermal images of animals that are in the open pasture and the animals that are in the silvopasture. They're there, they have a heat signature, but they're not as bright and they're taking advantage of the shade. And this is what these animals are having to deal with. Hardwood animals in the hardwood system, there's a 6 degree Fahrenheit difference through the day for those animals. So, 90 something to a little over 100. Pine, a little less valuable from a standpoint of high surface temperature, but certainly a lot more valuable than for those animals that have no shade. This 19-degree temperature swing through the day. So those animals without shade are hotter internally, and they have greater extremes in high temperature over the day. That's heat they got to deal with. Now, I'm not here to say it's all hunky dory because we see one of the things that we see is those animals that are in the open systems, they're not as productive as those animals that are in the new silvopasture or the pine or hardwood silvopasture in June. No difference in July, but if you're looking at the patterns, you're thinking, well, they're maybe not as productive in those systems. And we go back to October, same sort of deal. No difference, but maybe, if we did this over a long period of time, we would get some pattern of greater productivity. But we really can't say that. June the next year, again, it looks like we might have some better gains, but not really any difference. A lot of variability there. By the time we get to July, a little more questionable about, how productive these systems are. And August, that's true as well. So, I'm not going to tell you, hey, you can make everything more productive with silvopasture. It comes back to what are we working with? What do we manage? How do we do that? And again, I want to make this point. None of these systems that are at the Southern Piedmont, where there's a lot more heat stress, were built on Kentucky 31 tall fescue. Now, I'm going to say this. We do a lot of time treating symptoms. In Virginia, because of vague concerns, we have a lot of cattle that are in streams. They're causing a lot of bank degradation. So what's our solution? We're going to fence this. And my argument would be that fences don't solve fescue toxicosis. The alkaloids synthesized by the fungus that lives in this plant cause a lot of stress for these animals. You can see they're hairier, and their best way of dissipating heat is at the extremities. And so what do they go do? They go stand in the water. And so these animals that are on non-toxic fescue are they're not suffering that way. But say, well, okay, how do I deal with that? Because we're fencing streams, and those animals don't have shade. So what's the value of shade for animals that are on toxic fescue? Interestingly enough, if we remove toxic or if we put in novel fescue, so let's start line 1 and line 3. We're comparing animals that are on toxic fescue with animals that are on non-toxic fescue. Gain for cows is certainly better, and the calving rate is certainly better, 38 versus 63. And then calf weaning weight is certainly better. But what's intriguing to me is that animals that are on infected fescue, so now we're going to compare line 1 with line 2, animals that are on infected fescue and have shade, the cows don't do as well, but look at the calving percent. Shade was more important in this study for calving percent than just moving the animals off non-toxic fescue. So I think there's a real kind of sheltering benefit from these systems. And you think about those heat swings that we showed you earlier from the Southern Piedmont, that puts a lot of stress on the animal. So now let's go look at line 4. If I have non-toxic fescue and shade, I have similar calving percent, and I have the highest weaning weights for those animals. So there are real potential benefits by having shade in the system. So Here's a question for you. What's climate going to feel like in 60 years at some of the current models that we have for what's happening with heating? I just put in Lexington since, that's where this thing is being broadcast out of. In 60 years, it'll feel like Blanchard, Louisiana. Sounds comfortable, don't you think? So, what are we going to do with this? Are we going to plant trees or are we going to buy shade structures? Um, you know, you could put 20,000, actually probably there's probably about 25 now, and I'm not against this. I'm not against using shade structures. But, maybe if you could plant 40 acres of pines or some other kind of tree that has value, you can appreciate the value of your land, grow your bank account, as opposed to, having this piece of equipment that depreciates. Now, a lot of people say, well, there's a lot of work to do this. Hey, no question. But you got to move this thing every day or so too. So, I mean, it takes work. Either one of them is going to take work, and you just need to think about which work do I want to do. I want to talk a little bit about trees as, in other contexts. These are pictures from Idaho where an animal is browsing willow, and there's some other evidence of willow trees as having benefits from the phytochemistry with salicylic acid and that sort of thing. There also can be fairly digestible. Some evidence of reduced methane with willow in the diet, and willow is not the only one. I mentioned Robinia toxicosis. People say, "Oh, these black locusts are toxic." Well, uh, this producer who is letting the cows manage the trees, he said he took this picture when the rain was out, and it just put enough weight on the branch where she could just reach that tree. Uh, this producer, these two pictures are from the same farm. He actually actively cuts trees with what he calls a hinge cut. So he cuts the top side, so the branch will fall, and they can access it. And he hasn't cut away the entire layer or they cut away the entire branch because it will leaf out another time, and those cows will come back and rebrowse these branches. Um, and there are a number of potential reasons, or values in doing that. Alternative too tall fescue, a legume in the system in the case of black locust, so you improve maybe some protein nutrition and digestibility. Um, Black locust also has tannins, and we have some preliminary evidence that tannins can bind the toxins in tall fescue. So there may be a number of reasons why these cows that are on fescue pastures like these black locust trees, and they're not the only ones with tannins in them. Willow again may have some tannins too. The other piece about this, I was saying, I mentioned the idea of farm resiliency. Um, you get into a drought, and typically the greenest grass will be under the tree. But then again, the trees themselves can be a fodder resource. And as a kid, I remember news out of the Midwest, one of these severe droughts, and people were cutting cottonwood and sycamore and anything they could to feed their cattle. So they're an opportunity to buffer and to build reserves and resources for the system on a number of levels. And these are just a couple of pictures from this farm here where he's planted rows of black locust around the farm. So thinking about doing it, and I'm going to start from the planting side. Um, you know, weed management, herbicide, vegetation management is important for getting these trees in place. This farmer, same guy that had these black locusts I was showing you, he didn't mind getting out his little machine and mowing over all this stuff, but he wanted to do this kind of in an organic fashion to keep his wife happy. And they used a scalper to prepare the zone where they're going to plant the trees. But the problem with the scalper is it throws all this sod over, and he said it was pretty challenging to run his little mower over top of all that stuff. So that was a problem. The other issue with the scalper is that it opened up the soil, and all of these thistles that were here had an opportunity to grow. Now, weeds are not necessarily a problem. And I can just hit on that here and maybe again later. The thistles, in some respect, kept deer and other wildlife away from his tree tubes. Um, these are, by the way, these are 4-foot tree tubes, and he had fence on both sides here. And I'm going to show you some newer approaches for doing this in here in just a little bit. This is from the southern Piedmont. I said, forget putting protection around these trees. Let's just stick them in the ground and don't worry about it because pines are cheap. There's a little bit of damage from cattle, but they don't really like yellow pine very much. And so on we go. So I mentioned weeds aren't all bad. This is from a little plot of ground that I have in Blacksburg. These are two black locust trees that were just a few feet apart. This had some weeds around it, a blackberry, and the buck scrape is on the tree that didn't have the weeds around them. And then we've seen that even with things like um, broom sedge. You know, the deer just don't seem to want to get into that kind of stuff, and they'll leave the tree alone if it's got that kind of cover. If you're thinking about planting, and these are with pines, but this is going to be true with hardwoods as well. Species can make a difference, and so how you go about managing that, if you've got deer to deal with, deer fence, that kind of stuff is going to be important. Um, Generally, we think about protection. There's a lot of different ways to do it. These two pictures on the left are from New Zealand, and I wouldn't recommend this, but it's just kind of humorous how they've approached it. Some people have done this kind of more fancy or more complicated protection. I would say there's no way to get to scale with that. But this is a farm in Pennsylvania. And if you can see all these little white stakes, those are tree tubes. And you're thinking, my God, how do you manage that? Well, this is how that's being managed. First, inside the tube, they put a little vole deterrent because you can get voles and field mice that will come in and chew up on these things. And now the kind of the newer strategy has been to put polywire around the tube. This is one that's where the tube is right next to the main fence line, and they just run the polywire around that, and on they go. And let me clarify here something for you. So this is a fiberglass stake, and it's got a little mark that says drive it into the ground this far. One of the benefits of the fiberglass is that it is flexible. The tube goes around the fiberglass, and you put a twist tie around the tube and the stake to hold that tube in place. And if the wind blows, it will move, and the trees will get moved with it, which is considered a benefit over a fixed wooden stake because you build brace wood and you make a stronger tree, or at least that's the theory. And so this is from one of our research farms, and this shows you what some people will call a high line system, or that's what I call it. Some people call it overpass. I think, well, nothing's passing over this. It should be underpass. But anyway, that's different names for the idea. But you're thinking about I could integrate the trees with my fencing system. I could have that fence down low, or I can put the fence up tall, put the fence line up high, and that way I don't, my cows just pass right on through. And in this case, rather than poly wire, we're using aluminum wire that seems to work better, easier just in terms of getting it on the tubes and stuff. You may be able to see a mat here. In this picture, they've used mulch, and I think mulch is probably going to be a preferred method for keeping some of the vegetation down. But maybe in a system where you can bring cattle, it's not all that important. And I'll say quick shade is possible. A lot of people say, well, I want shade quickly, so I want to thin. Well, okay, we'll talk about that in a second. Uh, but this is a hybrid willow, and this is a hybrid poplar, and this is a black locust that was planted as a pretty good sized tree. The willow and the poplar are what we would call well, what the heck? I don't even remember what we call them. Live stakes. That's what we call them. We call them live stakes. And so in this case, they would have been a 10-foot pole, and you would dig a hole 2 feet, stick it in the ground, make sure that it's tight, and then you've got an 8-foot stem standing above the ground surface. And this is a 6-foot tube, so I'm already out the ground 2 or 3 feet. I can get shade very rapidly with these tree species. And the black locust, I can do that as well. Some of those earlier plantings that you saw, real challenging. You had a 4-foot tube, and so if you want to plant, you're probably better to go with a taller tube. that gives you some flexibility in terms of how you set up fence lines. It keeps deer off of the top of the tree because if it's 4 feet, it's just kind of smorgasbord time for deer. And so, we can make rapid gains for animal comfort and welfare with these types of systems. So this is a test site, and you can see all of these trees in the back. They are those live stakes that were planted. And this is a farm in Southwest Virginia. They're using the more traditional wooden stake, still with this kind of high line system, and cows go underneath it. All right. Well, what about thinning? And this is a site from Nelson County, Virginia, and the guy had goats, so we got Sericea lespedeza back into his system for that. Largely poplar based, was working well for him. You may not have poplar, you may have cedar trees. And so I asked this question, can you work with what you got? Surely, there are opportunities for thinning that makes sense. But one of the things that I want to impress upon you, if you're going to thin, it's difficult to do good, fast, and cheap. You can get it shade immediately, and that's fine. And that is once you can get the animals on the site. It can be done quickly, but it may be expensive, and it can be costly if it's not done well. So this farmer had a site where Chris and I did, actually, Chris, this is from our field day there in 2013, or training, and he thinned, and the trees actually grew faster the first couple of years, but he did a really hard thinning, and white oak does not like that. And you see all of this epicormic branching and dieback. So we would have recommended a different approach to thinning there. From a commercial standpoint, it didn't bother him because he said this is going to go to railroad ties. It's not going to become cabinets or veneer or that sort of thing. So, okay, if you got a market, that's fine. He did the work himself, so that's fine. So he was willing to manage all of that stuff. But if you've got to pay somebody to come do it, it can be expensive. And if they don't do a good job, it'll be really expensive. I show this picture again because we're on another site where he had worked with a commercial forester, and the outcomes for the trees were better. Um, some of the things to think about, will it fit your farm operation? Does it match? Do you have the infrastructure? Is it going to work? And the backwoods is often the backwoods for a reason. So you might have a lot of challenges. I want to show these pictures in more detail here in a little bit. A lot of times you don't have a lot of stuff to work with, from a starting perspective. The other piece of this is, what are you going to do with all that stuff that's down on the ground? How are you going to get that done? And if they're cutting and they leave stumps that are 18 inches tall, that doesn't help you get any farm equipment through. So, you got to think about all of the process it's going to take to turn this site into something that you can manage. Looks like I've got this twice. So there was an old homestead on here that we burned. One thing about burning, if you burn too close to a leaf tree, you're going to hurt your leaf tree. And another thing about this is just finding a logger who understands this process and knows how to do it. And let's say you've got one of those old rough sites. Well, how good is the soil fertility going to be? How are you going to get forage established? pH is often an issue. Fertility is likely going to be limited. How do you get seed in? Some people may do bale bombs. I'll show a picture of that. Do you have smaller equipment that will allow you to work in this kind of setting? And this is a picture from Missouri. Maybe you've got a setting like this. You got some pine or maybe hardwood with a really not so great understory, but maybe you've got an opportunity to use something like goats. This is a former student that was doing this, brought goats in, used portable fencing, browsed through here, through vegetation, throughout grass and legume seeds that he wanted. And over time, he also did some thinning of this overgrown kind of pine stand to make timber improvements and also get the silvopasture going. Just a few slides of producers. Again, I asked this question, do you plant trees or buy structures? This guy wants to plant trees, and this is what he's done. He brought the cattle in this past September for the first time after about 3 years. These were very good pine trees, and he did a good job of controlling the vegetation around them so they could really take off. So you can see that's like, I think year two or three maybe, and they're about twice his height. Uh, Cheap way to set up fencing in this system, just for those of you who might try it. A bungee cord and a fence insulator and some wire. I thought that was pretty innovative. Uh, Not a whole lot of work. And again, he's not trying to protect trees at this point. He's trying to keep cows where he wants them. Now, this is the story that I mentioned earlier. I wanted to tell you. This is from Brett Chedzoy up in New York. He's a forester and a cattleman, won the National Cattlemen's Beef Association Award, Environmental Stewardship Award recently. Um, he said, "This is our farm before 2004. It's overgrown with a bunch of stuff that you don't want." And so, the conversation from foresters is often, we're going to keep the livestock out of the woods so they don't eat the regeneration. And he's a forester and says, "Do you believe that? Really? Where's the regen here?" So he did some harvest work, got money from that to help build the infrastructure, did do a little mulching, and then got some grass seed into the place. In some cases, he used what another colleague calls bale bombs, bring in that first cut that's got some seed in it and get it scattered out with the cows to do the renovation. You can see this is mostly black locust trees, and this is what that site looks like. And some of these trees, you can get several poles or posts out of this. And he was making good money selling black locust poles out of the system. I mean, I think better than $1,000 an acre and maybe a few $100 more than that per acre. Um, anyway, I'd have to go back and confirm that, but my memory it was like $1,500 an acre. This is kind of what that looks like now. The vegetation is not all grass, and he's okay with that. And this is a guy who's doing silvopasture in two continents. I just throw this picture in because it's kind of neat. They planted a bunch of radiata pine. His wife comes from Argentina, and they've got silvopastures down there as well. So this is kind of his final statement on this. The adjacent plantation was head high with invasives. We're grazing. We're making, a marketable product with cattle by putting sunlight into resources that can be converted to cattle. And we're making marketable products with these black locust trees. Um, we see adoption in different ways. Some people like to thin stands, across the stand. Other people are, cutting strips out and doing some things like that. I'm going to stop here and point you to some resources. We've got three publications. I think Chris's name is on two of those three probably. Defining silvopasture and how to go about creating silvopasture when we're planting or when we're thinning. So that'll give you something to look at if you want. And if you're thinking about planting, we also have some tree selection guides that might be appropriate. Just thinking about, what species might work best for your soils and environment. You can find all of that at our silvopasture website. And the other thing I would encourage you to look is the video list. I've got something like 15 videos from producers who have implemented silvopasture. And so, getting a sense of their experience and their approach would be useful. And I'm going to stop there. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Fike. That was very
Yeah,
good.
that's
I
awesome.
mean, I learned a lot. I really appreciate
Yeah,
you doing that.
yeah,
You're welcome.
I
yeah.
was looking,
And
we
I
had a
was
lot.
also glad you talked about kind of because when you started, I was like, oh, what about the trees? But yeah, I mean, it seems like there's ways to make that work. Yeah, really good.
Definitely. Yeah, I was looking through. I see a lot of comments, but I don't see any
Any question?
questions. Billy, am I missing
No,
anything?
I didn't see any right now
Yeah.
either. Wait, somebody just no good stuff
Nope.
there.
Just
Yeah,
thank you, wonderful, and a lot of comments about how that makes sense, what you're talking about. So that was great. That was great.
yeah. Dr. Fike, could you please drop that link into our chat? That
I will
main
do
link.
that.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you. That'd be great. So yeah, and if you can hang tight with us, and we're going to kind of shift gears to Mr. John Schultz.
Yep.
Greetings,
Hi,
John.
John. We know
Greetings.
you've been on here before, and we
Yeah.
Yeah,
appreciate.
I'm not a first timer.
No,
No,
we still love
not.
you though. So
I know, I
yeah,
know. Um,
So we appreciate you being on here and talking a little bit about some cost share programs that can
yeah.
go along with what he just spoke about.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me pull up my screen
Yeah,
here.
again, folks, if y'all have questions for Dr. Fike or John, just drop them in the chat and we'll get to them. But all right, we got your
Nope,
presentation,
we
John.
got it.
Thank you.
Go
All
ahead.
right. So for those that don't know me that are on the program here, my name is John Schultz. I'm the state forester for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, based out of Lexington, Kentucky. And while my title is forester, this topic of silvopasture and integrating cattle, livestock is really goes back to my own personal roots. I also hold a rangeland management degree and practiced range science in Northern California and Oregon before coming to Kentucky and really concentrating on the forestry aspect here. So I what I see in a lot of what John's talk is and kind of what we see as around the topic of silvopasture in Kentucky and the other eastern states is really a continuum from that. You know, John spoke a lot about being intensive and incorporating shade into existing pastures, all the way to removing, thinning existing forests to create more of a woodland, which would be the natural native plant community that would be dominant in a lot of places in Kentucky, and using cattle to manage that herbaceous understory. One of the many tools that we can use to do that. You know, fire, mowing, those sorts of things are also natural ways to manage that herbaceous understory. And so, you know, that really gets into more of the range science, you know, managing a natural plant community. So the topic has fascinated me on both ends. But what I'm going to do today is just run through a few of the NRCS resources that we have available, and I can get my mouse to work. Really, where we start as an agency is documenting what the landowner's goals and objectives are. So private landowners work with NRCS for many reasons. And on the topic of silvopasture and just incorporating livestock into wooded systems, that there may be future timber production goals, and I say timber production, just forest products in general. So harvesting posts, those sorts of things, in that like highly managed black locust system, walnut, high value, future saw logs coming out of that, planted into pastures. A lot of landowners may be more interested in that wildlife habitat, so restoring that natural plant community, mostly for the habitat values that brings in. And we know a lot of landowners are that have current livestock are really interested in looking at their grazing resources, improving forage quality and quantity, and how that affects livestock production, while also benefiting the pasture resources. So really where it all starts with, before we really move into programs, is having a conservation plan. So John spoke to the one of his eyes was being intentional about this planning of silvopasture, and so you know there's a lot of principles. There's a lot of variables that go into it. Each farm is completely different. Past management, current baseline conditions, those sorts of things. So it really starts with a comprehensive plan, and in that plan, what we'll do is we will um, figure out what types of trees, what species of trees, how to integrate them, how to the tree protection, all of those things that John spoke about establishing a silvopasture, or if there's existing forests that could be appropriate to bring back to that more native woodland type system. What the thinning densities would be, what currently do you have, what would what would we potentially bring that down to? How would you get grass established or other forbs established underneath? Are you looking at more of a cool season fescue dominated system, or are you looking at incorporating like native warm season grasses, really kind of get through that summer slump, which in my opinion works really well in kind of a woodland shaded system, and really kind of goes to that managing that native plant community. So a lot of things to look at. We have resource professionals across the state, either NRCS staff. We have partnerships with wildlife biologists, private consulting foresters, other partners that really bring that expertise that can come onto your property and work with you to develop that plan. And so for silvopasture in particular, depending on the system that we're looking at, we could have a traditional forest management plan that we do just to look at forest resources, but we could also incorporate a grazing management plan in that as well. And those are both products that we produce that are really beneficial for a landowner in making their decisions. So just really quickly, just some of the ideas that we promote when it comes to forest health. Just promoting good, healthy forests, both in structure and composition, and also productivity and health of the forest in itself. And we see the forest for the trees, but the understory and the makeup of that understory is really a key component to any fully functioning healthy forest system. We can also really look at grazing management. So for this, we're looking for healthy pastures, which leads to direct sediment source reduction in the waterways, improved nutrient distribution across the grazing areas, and improved livestock performance as a benefit to improving that management of the grazing resources. So once the plan is created and you have an idea as a landowner of the work that you have ahead of you, NRCS offers several different programs to offer cost incentive payments. The old term's cost share, but really what we're doing is adopting some of these conservation practices leads to a payment to the producer in as those are implemented. So in the environmental quality incentives program is really our flagship program, and that's one where if you were to plant 20 acres of trees, and you are following that plan that we created together on your property, then the planting of those trees, the site prep of those to plant those trees, those are all items that can be reimbursed. A certain cost can be reimbursed for those once those practices are implemented and we can see that they're functioning. And so the environmental quality incentives program is that kind of flagship program. We also have the conservation stewardship program. A few changes to that this year, and your local office would definitely be that resource for you in understanding what those are. So it is a competitive process, and so that's where, again, back to that, having a full comprehensive plan before applying is really critical. So kind of all the moving parts of what you need to do in especially for silvopasture, there could be a lot of nuances to it. So having it thoroughly thought out and being ready to implement before you actually put that application in to get those payments, then that's definitely what we're trying to really promote, just in that topic in general. So if there's any additional questions, I'm putting my contact information up here. I always like to hear from producers and folks that are out there in the audience that are or may pick this up at a later date that are implementing this and have something that they would like for me to see. I'm always looking for places, especially in that more natural native woodland type plant community, which we see a lot of in the bluegrass where I'm out of Lexington, where but these are pretty highly managed pastures with just a lot of remnant bur oak and blue ash, chestnut oak out there in the system. And I mean, some of these trees predate even the settlement period. So it's great that landowners are taking care of those resources, but kind of reestablishing that plant community. Always looking for sites to kind of get out and just at least get baseline information that we can use to improve the recommendations that we make to landowners that are trying to do similar type practices. So with that, just appreciate everybody's time, and if there's any questions or inquiries, I'm more than happy to take them.
Great job. Thank you very much, John. We really appreciate that.
Yeah. So a really good presentation. And again, folks, if you've got questions for either of our presenters, you got just a few moments, go ahead and drop those in. But John, thank you really for what you do for forestry here in the state, as well as all of our producers. And we do appreciate NRCS so much. Dr. Fike, you got anything else you want to add to any of that?
So there's what do they call it now? Advancing Markets Program or whatever. There's a grant that's been led by the University of Tennessee called the Grassland Partnership, which is NRCS supported.
Right.
And silvopasture is one of the practices that they will pay for in that grant. Dr. Ray Smith is, I guess, part of the Kentucky team, maybe the liaison with that. If you're interested in any of that, we have a catalyzing agroforestry project or program grant, similar, funding from the federal government that goes across states, and implementing silvopasture is a part of that. So there are other sources of funding available at this point beyond NRCS. Virginia Tech has a family foundation actually that has helped us get silvopasture in place on a number of farms, and not any knock against NRCS, but probably don't have quite the paperwork and the obligations that you have to have with NRCS to do that. So look around. There are other opportunities even beyond NRCS in some locations for some of these practices.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'll mention a couple we have here in Kentucky. We do have a soil and water conservation fund that's out there. We also have a county agriculture investment program that's available in many counties. I think silvopasture would be available to both of those programs. And Kentucky State University does offer a small farm grant program where you can get a total of $10,000 to kind of help with some of your operations. So there are some localized things too. So talk to your natural resource professionals, talk to your county extension agent, find out what programs are available locally if this is something you're really interested in.
Is there a minimum acres, Billy? Do you know?
Well, most of those, no, right? I mean, NRCS has no minimum acreage. The problem is being competitive, right? So, if you have a very small parcel, you may not be competitive against competitive funds, right? So, and it's also based on kind of the resource needs being addressed. So while there is no minimum, you may just not have enough of a case if you have a very small parcel, if that makes sense.
Right. And I know Dr. Fike mentioned Chris several times, and people were probably like, "Who's this Chris they're talking about?" So Chris, I didn't know if you're on here. I don't know if you actually wanted to pop on just for a second. And
introduce yourselves to everybody.
Yeah, I'm Chris Teutsch. I'm a forage extension specialist at the University of Kentucky's Research and Education Center in Western Kentucky. And I've been interested in silvopastures for a long time. The last project I had when I was still at Virginia Tech was some of the pictures that John showed of a
Mhm.
landscape scale silvopasture establishment study. Um, I've always viewed silvopasture, the biggest benefit for incorporation into livestock operations is shade for livestock. That's one of our welfare issues that we're facing as we go forward is having adequate shade for livestock. And even if it's not positive, you know, production wise, welfare wise, and the optics for people outside of agriculture, seeing animals have shade in the summertime is going to be pretty important as we move forward.
Good point.
I would agree.
Well, this presentation that you kind of helped us get Dr. Fike
Mhm.
with may lead to some more activity in this area. So, folks, if you all have need local resources here in Kentucky, we've got one out in Princeton. So, yeah, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention and getting Dr. Fike with us today. It was a good presentation, and thank you all.
I just wanted to give you a little shout out because you
Yep.
you helped me arrange all this, so I appreciate it very much.
Yep, anytime.
Good
Okay.
stuff. All right.
All right.
Excellent,
Well,
Renee.
good show,
It
Billy.
really was a good show. Really appreciate
Mhm.
our guests. They covered a lot of content, and you
Mhm.
might have to get back and watch that recording to get some of the
Exactly.
finer details. But we will have that available for you soon. But we appreciate you all being with us each week. That this program came for some suggestions from folks, so we're excited to kind of meet you where you're at. So let us know what you'd like to see, and we'll do a good job of trying to track somebody down and cover it for you.
Exactly. You just go to fromthewoodstoday.com and you can find this probably by the end of this week, first of next week. And any show that we've done, there's over 250 shows on there that you can watch. Binge watch us for days, we've said.
There you go.
Again, if you wanted to go to fromthewoodstoday.com, there's also a survey there you can click on and you can say, hey, I need to know about this topic, and we'll be happy to do that.
Yep.
Also, in the chat pod, I have a sign up for From the Woods Today reminders. You can go to that little URL there and click on if you want a 1 to 3 day notice or you'd like a 1 hour notice. Either way, you can sign up for those if you're not already on there, and we can get those. And that way, every topic that's going to be coming up before we're actually on. So,
Yeah. And not only that, once you know about it, tell somebody else, right? We need
exactly.
more people to understand and know this information. And so please help us diffuse it across Kentucky and the region. And, let's make our forest, wildlife, and natural resources better than they are now.
Exactly. So we will definitely see you all next week. We please take care until then. And I know we're supposed to have some severe weather, so stay safe.
Yeah.
And we will see you all next week. Take care.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
From the woods today. From the woods today.